People like you don't get jobs like this, the recruiter said, not even bothering to lower his voice, and the room didn't laugh out loud. But it didn't need to, because silence can hum just as loudly when it agrees with something cruel, and Marcus Reed felt it settle around him like dust under fluorescent lights, quiet, steady, familiar, as if he had stood in that exact moment 100 times before, judged not by what he could do, but by what he looked like, a worn jacket, work boots that had seen too many miles, and eyes that carried more responsibility than sleep. And yet he didn't argue, didn't defend himself, didn't raise his voice, because dignity doesn't need permission to exist. It simply stands there, even when no one claps for it, even when no one sees it. And Marcus just nodded once, slow and respectful, as if the man had told him something worth thanking, turned, and walked out of the glass building into the late morning heat, where the sun hit harder than expected, and the parking lot shimmered like a mirage. And for a moment, just a moment, he closed his eyes, not in defeat, but in quiet recalibration, the kind a single father learns over time when life doesn't go as planned but still has to move forward, because somewhere across town a little girl was waiting for him to come home with good news, and he had none. Not today. Not yet. But he would find a way, he always did, because that's what quiet strength looks like. It doesn't announce itself, it adapts. And just as he reached into his pocket for his phone, maybe to check the time, maybe to calculate how many hours he had left before school pickup, the screen lit up with a notification that didn't belong in a day like this. A message from an unknown sender, clean, simple, almost too simple. You've been selected. Report immediately. Marcus frowned slightly, not confused, not hopeful, just observant, because life had taught him that anything too sudden usually came with a cost, and he tapped the message open, reading it again, slower this time, the words unchanged, the meaning no clearer, and for a few seconds the world seemed to pause around him. The distant hum of traffic, the soft buzz of a street lamp overhead, the faint click of someone's heels behind him, all blending into a quiet backdrop as he stood there, weighing something that couldn't be measured in dollars or promises, because this wasn't just about a job. It was about instinct, about whether to trust a door that appeared out of nowhere, and then a voice behind him cut through the stillness, light, amused, dismissive. Let me guess, another rejection? Marcus turned his head slightly, recognizing the tone more than the face. One of the other applicants, clean suit, confident smile, the kind of man who had never needed to wonder if he belonged in a room. And Marcus simply shook his head once, calm, grounded. No, he said quietly, not this time. And the man smirked, already losing interest, already certain he understood the situation. But Marcus wasn't speaking to him anymore. He was looking at the message again, thumb hovering just above the screen, and then, without ceremony, without hesitation, he tapped accept, and somewhere far beyond the edge of that ordinary parking lot, engines began to turn, a runway cleared, and a private jet, already fueled, already waiting, stood silent under the wide American sky, ready for a man who had just been told he didn't belong anywhere. The message did not come with instructions, only an address and a time. And Marcus Reed had learned that the world sometimes spoke in fragments, not explanations, so he did what he always did when certainty was not available. He chose movement over doubt, and within minutes he was back in his truck, the engine turning with a low, steady hum as he pulled out of the parking lot and onto the road that cut through the edge of the city, past rows of small businesses and fading billboards that promised things no one really believed anymore. And as the miles rolled under his tires, he glanced at the clock on the dashboard, calculating without saying it out loud, school pickup in 3 hours. Enough time if this was real, not enough if it was not, but still he drove, because providing does not always come with guarantees. Sometimes it comes with quiet risks taken by people who cannot afford to fail, and the address led him farther than expected, away from traffic, away from noise, toward a stretch of land where the city seemed to loosen its grip and the sky opened wider, cleaner, until finally a chain-link gate came into view, guarded but not imposing, and he slowed, unsure for the first time if he should stop or turn around. And then a voice came through a speaker mounted beside the gate, calm, precise. Marcus Reed, it said, not asking, just confirming, and he paused for half a second before answering. Yes. His tone steady, grounded, and the gate began to slide open without another word. Metal moving against metal in a slow, deliberate motion that felt less like permission and more like recognition. And as he drove through, the space beyond unfolded in a way that did not match the simplicity of the message he had received. A private runway stretched across the horizon, clean lines, polished surfaces, the kind of place built for people who move differently through the world, and at the far end of it, unmistakable even from a distance, sat a jet, white and silent, its wings catching the sunlight like something waiting rather than resting. And Marcus eased his truck to a stop, engine idling for a moment before he turned it off, and for the first time since tapping that message, he allowed himself to sit still, hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, eyes fixed ahead, not in disbelief, not in excitement, but in careful observation, because something about this did not ask for reaction. It asked for character, and then a man in a dark suit approached from the side of the runway. Measured steps, professional posture, the kind of presence that did not need to introduce itself loudly. And when he reached the driver's side window, Marcus rolled it down halfway, just enough to meet him without assumption, and the man nodded once. Respectful but reserved. "You are early," he said, and Marcus gave a small shrug. Almost apologetic, traffic was light, and the man studied him for a brief second, not judging, not welcoming, simply noting, before stepping back slightly and gesturing toward the jet. "You may proceed when ready." And there was no urgency in his voice, no pressure, just an open path. And Marcus looked past him again, at the aircraft, at the open sky beyond it, at the distance between where he stood and whatever this moment was becoming. And instead of stepping out immediately, he reached for his phone, opened a contact labeled with a simple name, and typed a message with steady hands, "Running a little late today. I will be there soon. I love you." And after sending it, he placed the phone back in his pocket, exhaled slowly, and opened the truck door, stepping out into a world that did not yet know what to make of him, but would soon have no choice but to notice. Marcus Reed did not move right away, even after the car door closed behind him with a soft, final click, because something in the air felt measured, intentional, like every second here was being observed, not judged loudly, but weighed quietly. And he had learned over the years that moments like this were not about speed, they were about clarity, so he adjusted his jacket slightly, squared his shoulders, and began walking across the smooth stretch of pavement toward the jet, each step steady, unhurried, his boots making a low, grounded sound against the concrete that seemed to echo just enough to remind him that he was still himself, still the same man who had walked out of that building less than an hour ago, still the same father who packed lunches and checked homework and fixed what he could with hands that had never been idle. And as he approached the aircraft, he noticed details that most people might have rushed past. The polished metal reflecting the sky in soft ripples. The stairs already lowered but unattended. The door open without invitation or instruction, as if the next move belonged entirely to him. And that was when he stopped, just a few feet from the first step, not because he was afraid, but because he was thinking, and a voice behind him broke the silence. Calm, professional. "Is there a problem?" The same man in the dark suit asked, his tone neutral, neither impatient nor encouraging. And Marcus turned slightly, meeting his eyes with a quiet steadiness. "I just want to be sure," he said, his voice low but clear. "This is meant for me." And the man did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his jacket, pulled out a tablet, glanced at it briefly, then back at Marcus. "You were selected," he said, repeating the words from the message as if they were the only explanation required. And Marcus nodded once, absorbing that, but not stepping forward yet, because selection without understanding meant nothing to him. And he added, "For what?" 3 simple words, no edge, no challenge, just truth-seeking. And for the first time, the man's expression shifted slightly, not discomfort, not authority, just the smallest trace of acknowledgement. "That," he said, gesturing toward the jet again, "is part of the process." And the answer hung there, incomplete but deliberate, like a test that refused to define its own rules. And Marcus looked back at the aircraft, then up at the sky beyond it, wide and open and indifferent to everything happening below. And he exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that comes before a decision that cannot be undone. And instead of stepping forward, he took a half step back, just enough to create space between himself and the stairs. And the man in the suit watched closely now, not interfering, not reacting, simply observing. And Marcus spoke again, quieter this time, almost himself, but still heard. "If this is a mistake, I will not take something that is not mine." And the words were not dramatic, not rehearsed, just honest. Rooted in a life where taking the wrong thing once could cost more than. It gave, and the air seemed to still for a moment. The faint hum of distant engines, the whisper of wind across the runway, all settling into a kind of quiet that did not rush him, did not push him, just waited. And then, without warning, a figure appeared near the far side of the jet, a woman stepping into view from behind the wing, dressed simply, no sign of status or authority. Just a calm presence moving toward the scene with measured steps. And Marcus noticed her without turning fully, aware of the shift before understanding it. And something in that moment changed, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough to suggest that whatever this was, it had only just begun. The woman did not hurry as she approached, and that was the first thing Marcus noticed. Not her appearance, not her expression, but her pace, calm and deliberate, like someone who had never needed to rush to be heard. And as she came closer, the wind shifted slightly, brushing a loose strand of her hair across her face before she tucked it back with a small, unbothered motion. Her clothing simple, understated, nothing that announced wealth or authority. Just neutral tones and clean lines that blended into the quiet order of the runway. And yet there was something in the way the man in the suit straightened subtly, not dramatically, just enough to signal recognition, that told Marcus she was not just another passerby. And when she stopped a few feet away, she looked at him directly, not scanning, not evaluating, just looking, as if the moment required nothing more than presence. "You did not board," she said, her voice even, neither surprised nor disappointed. And Marcus met her gaze with the same steady calm he had carried since stepping out of his truck. "I was not sure I should," he replied, and there was no apology in his tone, no hesitation, just clarity, and she tilted her head slightly, considering him. "Most people do not ask," she said, almost to herself, and then added, "They see an opportunity and they take it." And Marcus gave a small nod, acknowledging the truth in that without agreeing to it for himself. "Opportunity is not the same as permission," he said quietly, and for a brief second, something shifted in her expression, not surprise exactly, but interest, the kind that appears when someone says something that does not follow the expected script, and behind them the jet remained still, its open door waiting, patient, as if time itself had agreed to slow down for this exchange. And the man in the suit stepped back another inch, giving space without being told, his role now clearly secondary. And the woman turned her attention back to Marcus. "What if it was meant for you?" she asked, not as a challenge, but as a possibility, and Marcus glanced once more at the aircraft, then back at her. "Then I want to know why," he answered, and again there was no edge, no demand, just a simple insistence on understanding. And she studied him for a moment longer, the silence stretching but not uncomfortable, like the pause between notes in a piece of music that knows exactly where it is going. And then, without raising her voice, she said, "Walk with me," turning slightly toward the side of the runway where a service path curved away from the jet. And Marcus hesitated for half a breath, not out of doubt, but out of habit, measuring the choice before taking it. And then he followed, matching her pace as they moved away from the aircraft rather than toward it. And the distance between them and the jet grew slowly, deliberately, until it was no longer the center of the moment, just a presence in the background. And after a few steps, she spoke again. "You were offered something unexpected," she said, "and instead of taking it, you questioned it." And Marcus kept his eyes forward, the horizon stretching ahead in clean, uninterrupted lines. "I have learned that not everything unexpected is meant to be accepted," he replied, and she let that settle, the words landing without interruption, without correction. And then she stopped, turning to face him fully now, the sunlight catching in her eyes just enough to reveal a depth that had not been visible before. "Good," she said softly, and this time there was no neutrality in it, only certainty, and behind them, unnoticed by most, the man in the suit lifted a hand to his ear, speaking quietly into a device, and somewhere beyond the edge of the runway, unseen doors began to open, because the test was not about whether Marcus would step onto the jet. It was about whether he would refuse it. The word lingered in the air longer than expected. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet confirmation that something unseen had already shifted, and Marcus did not respond immediately because he understood that moments like this were not meant to be filled with quick answers. They were meant to be held, examined, respected, and he stood there facing her with the same grounded stillness that had carried him through harder days than this. The kind of stillness that does not come from confidence alone, but from responsibility, from knowing that every decision echoes somewhere beyond the present moment. And she watched him carefully, not with suspicion, not with superiority, but with a kind of attention that felt rare, as if she was not trying to figure him out, but to understand what guided him. And after a few seconds, she turned again, this time walking toward a small structure at the edge of the runway. A low building with glass panels that reflected the open sky. And without looking back, she said, "Come," not as a command, but as an invitation. And Marcus followed, his steps matching hers, steady, unforced, and as they approached the building, the door opened automatically, revealing a quiet interior, clean and minimal, with a few people inside dressed in similar understated professionalism, each one pausing just slightly as they entered, not staring, not reacting openly, but aware. And the subtle shift in their posture told Marcus more than any introduction could. This place had its own rhythm, its own hierarchy, and it was not built around noise, it was built around observation. And the woman led him to a table near the center of the room, where a tablet rested beside a single sheet of paper, blank except for a line at the top that read "Candidate Evaluation," and she gestured toward the chair across from it. "Sit," she said softly, and Marcus did. Not because he was told to, but because the moment felt right to continue, and he placed his hands lightly on the table, not touching the paper, not reaching for the tablet, just waiting, and she remained standing for a second before taking the seat opposite him, her posture relaxed but precise, and she asked, "Why did you come?" And the question was simple, almost obvious, but Marcus did not rush it. He let it settle, then answered, "Because I said I would," and she tilted her head slightly. "Not because of the job?" she asked, and he shook his head once. "I did not know what the job was," and a faint hint of something crossed her expression, approval perhaps, or recognition, and she tapped the edge of the paper lightly. "Most people would have filled this out already," she said, and Marcus glanced at it briefly before, returning his gaze to her. "Most people knew what they were signing up for," he replied, and that answer seemed to land deeper than the others, because the room itself felt quieter, the subtle movements of the staff slowing just enough to acknowledge that something real was unfolding, and she leaned back slightly, studying him in a way that was no longer detached. "And if I told you there is no job," she said, her voice steady, "would you still be here?" And Marcus did not hesitate this time. "Yes," he said, and the certainty in that single word carried more weight than any explanation could, and she held his gaze for a moment longer before looking down at the paper, then back up at him, and for the first time, a small, genuine smile appeared, not polished, not rehearsed, just real. "Good," she said again, quieter this time, almost to herself, and outside, beyond the glass walls, the jet remained in place. Engines silent, waiting not for a passenger, but for a decision that had already begun to reveal who Marcus Reed truly was. The decision did not echo with celebration. It settled, quiet and firm, like something that had been waiting to be spoken long before this moment. And Marcus Reed remained still after saying it, not expecting a reaction, not looking for approval, because the kind of choices that define a person rarely come with applause, they come with silence. And the woman across from him seemed to understand that, because she did not smile again, did not praise him. She simply nodded once more and reached for the tablet, tapping the screen with a controlled precision that signaled the next phase had already begun, and somewhere behind the glass walls the distant jet remained in place. Unchanged, almost forgotten now, as if it had never been the destination, only a doorway, and the room itself adjusted in subtle ways. A man near the back stepped aside to open a secondary door. Another staff member placed a small folder on a nearby counter, movements quiet, efficient, synchronized without needing to be announced. And the woman stood, her posture straight but not rigid, and said, "Follow me," her tone steady, and Marcus rose without hesitation, picking up his phone but not checking it, just holding it loosely in his hand as he walked beside her through the newly opened door into a narrower hallway where the air felt cooler, more contained, and the sound of their footsteps softened against a different flooring, less echo, more intention. And after a few steps she spoke again. "This is not an interview," she said, not turning to look at him. "It is a series of decisions." And Marcus nodded slightly, absorbing that without interrupting, and she continued, "Each one reveals something you cannot rehearse." And he responded quietly, "That is the point." And for a brief second her pace slowed just enough to acknowledge the answer, then resumed, and they entered another room, smaller, more personal, with a single desk, 2 chairs, and a large window that faced the runway from a different angle, closer now, more grounded, and she gestured toward the chair again, "Sit." And Marcus did, placing his phone gently on the desk this time, screen facing down, a small but deliberate act that did not go unnoticed, and she remained standing for a moment before walking to the window, looking out at the jet as if it were part of a larger equation. Then turning back to him, "There is someone here who needs assistance," she said, her voice unchanged. No title, no reward, no guarantee. A pause, measured, intentional. "You may decline." And Marcus did not ask who, did not ask why. He simply asked, "Where?" And that was enough, because the simplicity of the question carried the same pattern she had been observing all along. Action before advantage. Responsibility before recognition. And she walked toward the door, opening it halfway before adding one more line, softer now, almost reflective. "Most people choose the jet." And Marcus stood, his expression calm, unwavering. "Most people are not raising someone who is watching," he replied, and the words hung there, not as a defense, not as a statement, but as truth. And for the first time since this began, she did not respond at all. She simply stepped aside, giving him the path forward, and as Marcus moved past her into the hallway beyond, he did not look back at the jet, did not hesitate. Because the real test had never been about what he could gain, it was about what he would choose when no one promised him anything in return. Marcus did not need directions repeated, because the moment he stepped into the hallway, he could already sense where he was meant to go, not through signs or instructions, but through the subtle shifts in movement around him. A door held open a second longer than necessary. A glance exchanged between staff members who quickly returned to their work. The quiet orchestration of a place that did not rely on noise to function. And as he walked deeper into the building, the atmosphere changed again. Less polished, more practical, the kind of space where things actually happened rather than being presented. And at the end of the corridor, he found it, a smaller room with the door slightly ajar, light spilling out onto the floor in a narrow strip. And he paused only long enough to knock gently before stepping inside. Not waiting for permission, but offering respect. And what he saw was not what most people would have expected after everything that had led him here. No executives, no formal setting. Just a woman seated beside a table covered in scattered documents and a laptop that seemed to be struggling to keep up, her posture tense, her attention divided. And she looked up quickly as he entered, surprise flickering across her face. "I did not know they sent someone," she said, her voice carrying a mix of relief and hesitation. And Marcus gave a small nod, stepping further into the room without making it feel crowded. "I am here to help," he replied, simple, direct, and she exhaled softly, running a hand through her hair as if she had been holding something in for too long. "This system is failing, and I have been trying to stabilize it for over an hour," she said, gesturing toward the laptop. "If it crashes, we lose everything." And there was no panic in her tone, just pressure, the kind that builds quietly when responsibility has no backup plan. And Marcus moved closer, not rushing, not assuming control, just observing first, eyes scanning the setup, the connections, the documents, the rhythm of the problem before touching anything. And he asked one question, calm and grounded, "What have you tried?" And she explained quickly, walking him through the issue, her words speeding up slightly as she spoke. And Marcus listened without interrupting, nodding once or twice, absorbing not just the problem, but the effort behind it. And when she finished, he stepped beside her, reaching toward the laptop, but pausing just before making contact. "May I?" he asked. And she nodded immediately, stepping aside without hesitation, and he began working, not with urgency, but with clarity, each movement deliberate, each adjustment measured, and the room settled into a new kind of quiet, one built on focus rather than tension. And minutes passed, not long, but enough for something to shift, the system stabilizing, the error indicators fading one by one until the screen returned to a steady state. And the woman let out a breath she had not realized she was holding, leaning back slightly as the pressure lifted. "You fixed it," she said almost in disbelief. And Marcus shook his head once. "You kept it from failing," he replied, giving credit where it was due. And she looked at him differently then, not as someone sent to help, but as someone who understood what helping actually meant. And behind the glass wall of the corridor, unnoticed by both of them, the woman from before stood watching, her expression unreadable but her posture still, as if confirming something she had already begun to believe, because this was never about skill alone. It was about what a person chose to do when no one promised them anything in return. And in that quiet room, with no audience and no reward in sight, Marcus Reed had just made the choice again. The room did not celebrate the fix. There was no applause, no sudden rush of voices, just a quiet return to balance as the laptop screen steadied and the weight that had filled the air dissolved into something lighter, something almost invisible. And Marcus stepped back slightly, giving the woman space to confirm what she already knew, her fingers moving across the keyboard with a new kind of confidence, her shoulders lowering as the tension left them. And for a moment, neither of them spoke because the work itself had already said everything that needed to be said. And then she looked up at him, not with surprise anymore, but with a kind of grounded respect. "Thank you," she said, simple and sincere. And Marcus nodded once, not dismissing it, not holding on to it, just accepting it as part of the moment. "You were already close," he replied, his voice steady. And she gave a small breath of a laugh, the kind that comes when pressure finally breaks. "Maybe," she said, "but I would not have made it without help." And that word lingered just enough to carry meaning beyond the room, because help, real help, is not about stepping in to be seen, it is about stepping in when no one is watching. And Marcus glanced once toward the door, not out of impatience but awareness. And that was when it opened again, not abruptly, not dramatically, just enough to reveal the woman who had guided him here, standing quietly in the frame. Her presence calm, but unmistakable, and the room seemed to shift around her without moving, as if everything within it adjusted to acknowledge her without needing to be told. And the woman at the desk straightened slightly, instinctively, not out of fear but recognition. And Marcus turned to face her fully, his posture unchanged, his expression the same steady calm it had been since the beginning. And for a second, no one spoke. The silence stretching just long enough to settle into something meaningful. And then she stepped forward, her eyes moving briefly to the laptop, then back to Marcus. "You chose to stay," she said, not as a question but as a statement. And Marcus gave a small nod. "Yes." And she studied him for a moment longer before continuing. "You chose to help when there was no reward." Another pause, measured, deliberate. "And you chose to do it without asking who would see it." And Marcus did not respond to that, not because he disagreed,